In the bitter winter of 1831, in the isolated township of Millbrook, Missouri, the Harwick family became the subject of the most bewildering medical phenomenon ever recorded in the American frontier. Dr. Jonathan Whitmore, the territory's most respected physician, documented a condition so horrifying that it challenged every principle of medicine, morality, and human nature itself. For 18 months, 5 members of a single family could not achieve natural sleep unless they had taken a life that very day. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The official medical records were sealed by territorial authorities and buried in government archives for nearly 2 centuries. But the truth about the Harwick family reveals a darkness that forces us to question the very boundaries between medicine and madness, between curse and disease, between what we consider possible and what we dare not imagine. Before we delve into this extraordinary tale that will challenge everything you thought you knew about human nature, make sure to subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell. We uncover America's most shocking historical mysteries that mainstream history books refuse to discuss. Drop a comment below telling us which state you're watching from. We love connecting with fellow truth seekers around the globe. The Missouri Territory of 1831 was a harsh and unforgiving landscape where survival demanded strength, cunning, and an iron will. Towns like Millbrook existed on the very edge of civilization, surrounded by endless wilderness that harbored both opportunity and danger. These frontier communities were populated by hardy souls who had abandoned the comfort of established settlements in search of land, freedom, and the promise of a better life. Millbrook sat in a valley carved by the winding Clearwater River, surrounded by dense forests of oak and maple that provided both timber for construction and game for sustenance. The town consisted of perhaps 40 families, each carving out their existence through farming, trapping, or trade. Life was difficult, but the community had developed the tight bonds necessary for survival in such isolation. The Harwick family had arrived in Millbrook during the spring of 1829, among the first wave of settlers to establish permanent homesteads in the region. Ezra Harwick, a tall and imposing man of 35, had served with distinction in the War of 1812 before deciding to seek his fortune on the frontier. His wife, Constance, was a refined woman from Pennsylvania who had surprised everyone by adapting remarkably well to the demands of frontier life. Their children reflected the hardy stock from which they came. Marcus, their eldest son at 17, possessed his father's imposing physical presence and natural leadership abilities. Rebecca, 15, had inherited her mother's intelligence and grace while developing the practical skills necessary for survival in the wilderness. Young Daniel, only 12, showed promise as both scholar and hunter, equally comfortable with books and rifle. The family's youngest member was 8-year-old Sarah, a bright and energetic child whose laughter had become one of the most welcomed sounds in Millbrook. The girl possessed an unusual ability to befriend both humans and animals, often seen playing with wild rabbits or birds that seemed drawn to her gentle nature. Ezra had invested everything in establishing a successful homestead. He had purchased prime land along the river, built a sturdy log house that could withstand the harsh Missouri winters, and begun cultivating crops that would provide both sustenance and trade goods. The family also maintained livestock, including cattle, pigs, and chickens that supplied meat, milk, and eggs for their table and for sale to other settlers. By all accounts, the Harwicks were a model frontier family. They attended the small community church every Sunday, contributed to barn raisings and other communal efforts, and had earned the respect of their neighbors through honest dealing and hard work. Ezra served on the informal town council that made decisions affecting the entire community, while Constance had established herself as one of the settlement's most skilled healers, using knowledge of herbs and traditional remedies to treat common ailments. The family's reputation for reliability and good character made what happened to them all the more shocking and inexplicable. Dr. Jonathan Whitmore had established his practice in Millbrook specifically because he believed the frontier offered opportunities for medical advancement that were impossible in more established communities. A graduate of the University of Pennsylvania Medical School, Whitmore had chosen to forego the comfortable life of an urban physician in favor of serving communities that desperately needed medical care. Whitmore was a methodical man who believed in the power of careful observation and detailed documentation. His medical journals, which he maintained religiously, contained not only records of treatments and outcomes, but also his theories about the relationship between environment, lifestyle, and health. He was particularly interested in conditions that seemed unique to frontier life, believing that the isolation and harsh conditions of the wilderness might produce medical phenomena unknown in more civilized areas. The doctor first encountered the Harwick family in the summer of 1830, when young Daniel suffered a broken arm after falling from a tree. Whitmore was impressed by the family's calm competence during the medical emergency, and by their obvious care for one another. Constance assisted with the procedure to set Daniel's bone, displaying knowledge of anatomy that rivaled that of trained nurses in Philadelphia hospitals. During the weeks that followed, as Whitmore monitored Daniel's recovery, he had numerous opportunities to observe the family's daily routines and interactions. What he saw was a portrait of frontier success, a family that had not merely survived the challenges of wilderness life, but had thrived in conditions that broke many others. The Harwicks worked together with remarkable efficiency and mutual support. Each member of the family had specific responsibilities that contributed to their collective survival, but they also demonstrated flexibility and willingness to assist each other when circumstances demanded it. Even more impressive was their obvious affection for one another, a warmth and unity that seemed to sustain them through the inevitable hardships of frontier existence. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Dr. Whitmore noted in his journal that the Harwick family represented everything admirable about American frontier spirit. They combined practical skills with moral character, individual strength with family loyalty, and ambitious determination with community responsibility. In his professional opinion, they were among the most psychologically and physically healthy families he had encountered in his years of frontier practice. This assessment would make the transformation that occurred in the winter of 1831 all the more devastating and incomprehensible. The change began subtly, so gradually that even Dr. Whitmore, with his trained eye for detecting illness and abnormality, initially failed to recognize the signs of what was developing within the Harwick household. The first indication that something was wrong came from other families in the community, who began reporting strange nocturnal disturbances originating from the direction of the Harwick property. Samuel Morrison, whose homestead was closest to the Harwicks, mentioned to Dr. Whitmore that he had been hearing unusual sounds at night, sounds that seemed to suggest activity at hours when most frontier families would be fast asleep. Morrison described hearing what sounded like chopping or digging, punctuated by voices speaking in urgent, hushed tones. When pressed for details, Morrison explained that the sounds typically began well after midnight and continued until shortly before dawn. The activity seemed too organized and purposeful to be the work of thieves or vandals, but Morrison could not imagine what legitimate activities would require the entire Harwick family to be awake and working during those hours. Martha Henderson, another neighbor, reported that her chickens had been displaying unusual behavior, clustering together and refusing to venture outside their coop during daylight hours. She also mentioned that her dogs, normally friendly and sociable animals, had begun growling and showing signs of agitation whenever the wind carried scents from the direction of the Harwick property. These reports troubled Dr. Whitmore because they suggested that something was affecting not only the Harwick family, but also the animals in the surrounding area. In his experience, domestic animals often detected signs of illness or distress before human observers noticed obvious symptoms. The fact that multiple households were reporting similar animal behavior suggested that whatever was happening with the Harwicks was significant enough to be detected by creatures with more sensitive instincts than humans possessed. Dr. Whitmore decided to pay an unannounced visit to the Harwick homestead under the pretext of checking on Daniel's long-healed arm injury. What he discovered during that visit would begin a medical investigation that would challenge everything he thought. He understood about human physiology and psychology. When Dr. Whitmore arrived at the Harwick property on a cold February morning, his first impression was that the family appeared to be suffering from some form of chronic exhaustion. All 5 family members displayed the physical signs of severe sleep deprivation, including dark circles under their eyes, pale complexions, and a general lethargy that seemed inconsistent with their normally energetic demeanor. Ezra Harwick, typically a robust and commanding presence, appeared gaunt and hollow-eyed. His hands shook slightly as he greeted Dr. Whitmore, and his speech was slower and more deliberate than normal, as if the simple act of conversation required tremendous effort. When asked about his health, Ezra claimed that he had been experiencing difficulty sleeping due to concerns about spring planting and livestock management. Constance Harwick's condition was even more alarming. The woman who had once impressed Dr. Whitmore with her competence and vitality now appeared frail and distracted. She moved with the careful deliberation of someone who was not entirely certain of her physical coordination, and her responses to questions seemed delayed, as if she were struggling to process information that would normally present no difficulty. The children showed similar symptoms, but what disturbed Dr. Whitmore most was the change in their personalities. Marcus, typically confident and outgoing, had become sullen and withdrawn. Rebecca, once quick to smile and engage in conversation, now seemed nervous and suspicious. Daniel appeared listless and uninterested in activities that had previously captured his enthusiasm. Most troubling of all was the transformation in young Sarah. The child who had been the embodiment of innocent joy and energy now sat quietly in the corner, her bright eyes replaced by a vacant stare that seemed to focus on something beyond the visible world. When Dr. Whitmore attempted to engage her in conversation, Sarah's responses were monosyllabic and delivered without any trace of the animated personality that had previously defined her character. Dr. Whitmore conducted a thorough medical examination of each family member, testing their reflexes, examining their eyes and throat, listening to their heartbeat and breathing, and checking for signs of fever or other indicators of illness. Despite their obvious exhaustion and behavioral changes, all 5 family members appeared to be in reasonable physical health. Their vital signs were normal, they showed no symptoms of infectious disease, and their basic physiological function seemed unimpaired. What concerned Dr. Whitmore was the family's obvious reluctance to discuss their sleeping difficulties in any detail. When he suggested that he might be able to provide medication or treatment to help them rest more effectively, the family members exchanged glances that suggested some form of shared secret or understanding that they were not willing to reveal to an outsider. As Dr. Whitmore prepared to leave, promising to return in a few days to check on their progress, Ezra Harwick pulled him aside for a private conversation. The man's demeanor was that of someone wrestling with a terrible burden, someone who desperately wanted to confide in another person but was prevented by circumstances beyond his control. "Doctor," Ezra said, his voice barely above a whisper, "if something were to happen to my family, something that didn't make sense according to everything you learned in your medical training, would you try to help us anyway?" The question was delivered with such intensity and desperation that Dr. Whitmore immediately understood that the Harwick family was dealing with something far more serious than simple insomnia or anxiety about frontier life. Dr. Whitmore assured Ezra that he would do everything in his power to help the family, regardless of how unusual their circumstances might be. But even as he made this promise, the doctor could not have imagined that he was about to encounter a medical phenomenon that would challenge every assumption about human nature and the boundaries of scientific possibility. That night, Dr. Whitmore began keeping detailed observations of the Harwick property from a concealed position in the nearby woods. What he witnessed over the following weeks would provide the foundation for one of the most disturbing case studies in the history of American medicine, a documentation of events so extraordinary that they would remain classified for nearly 2 centuries. The truth about the Harwick family's condition would prove to be far more horrifying than anything Dr. Whitmore's medical training had prepared him to encounter, a revelation that would force him to question everything he thought he knew about the nature of human existence and the limits of scientific explanation. If this story has captured your attention and you want to uncover the shocking truth about what was really happening to the Harwick family, make sure you're subscribed to our channel with notifications turned on. Share this video with someone who appreciates mysteries that challenge our understanding of reality. In the comments below, let us know what you think could be causing this family's strange condition. We love hearing your theories before we reveal the disturbing truth. Dr. Whitmore's nocturnal surveillance of the Harwick property began on a moonless night in late February 1831. Positioned behind a cluster of oak trees approximately 200 yards from the family's log house, he had a clear view of their homestead while remaining completely concealed from observation. What he witnessed during those first few hours of watching would begin to unravel a mystery that defied every principle of medical science he had ever studied. The Harwick house remained dark and silent until approximately 2 o'clock in the morning, when Dr. Whitmore observed a single candle being lit in what he knew to be the main living area. Within minutes, all 5 family members emerged from the house, moving with purpose despite the bitter cold and complete darkness that surrounded their property. What struck Dr. Whitmore immediately was the transformation in their behavior. Gone was the lethargy and confusion he had observed during his daytime visit. The family moved with coordinated precision, each member apparently knowing exactly what role they were expected to play in whatever activity they were undertaking. Ezra carried what appeared to be several sharp tools, while Constance held a large cloth sack. The children followed behind their parents, with even young Sarah displaying an alertness and focus that seemed inconsistent with her earlier vacant demeanor. The family proceeded directly to their livestock enclosure, where they maintained several pigs, chickens, and a milk cow. Dr. Whitmore expected to witness some form of routine animal care, perhaps an emergency situation requiring attention during nighttime hours. Instead, he observed Ezra systematically selecting one of the pigs, a healthy animal that showed no signs of illness or distress. What happened next would haunt Dr. Whitmore for the remainder of his life. With clinical efficiency, Ezra killed the pig using a single precise cut to the throat. But rather than immediately beginning the process of butchering the animal for meat, the family gathered around the dying creature in what appeared to be some form of ritualistic observation. Each family member, including young Sarah, placed their hands on the pig as its life ebbed away. They remained in this position for several minutes, their faces displaying expressions of intense concentration, as if they were attempting to absorb something from the dying animal. When the pig finally expired, the family's demeanor changed dramatically. The exhaustion and lethargy that had characterized their behavior for weeks suddenly vanished, replaced by obvious relief and satisfaction. Dr. Whitmore watched in amazement as the family began moving with renewed energy, efficiently processing the dead animal and cleaning up all evidence of what had occurred. Most remarkably, within an hour of the pig's death, all 5 family members returned to their house and appeared to fall into deep, peaceful sleep. Dr. Whitmore remained in his hiding place until dawn, trying to process what he had witnessed. The family's behavior suggested some form of compulsive ritual, But the immediate and dramatic improvement in their physical condition indicated that something far more complex was occurring. The doctor had witnessed hundreds of deaths during his medical career, both human and animal, but he had never seen anything that resembled the Harwick family's apparent need to be present during the dying process. Over the following week, Dr. Whitmore continued his covert observations, documenting a pattern that became increasingly disturbing with each passing night. Every evening, the family would remain awake until they had killed one of their animals, always following the same ritualistic procedure of gathering around the dying creature and maintaining physical contact until death occurred. Only after this process was complete could any member of the family achieve natural sleep. The animals selected for these nightly killings appeared to be chosen randomly, with no regard for their value or condition. Healthy livestock worth significant money were killed alongside older animals that might logically be culled from the herd. The family's economic situation was rapidly deteriorating as they systematically destroyed their own means of survival, yet they seemed unable to modify their behavior despite the obvious consequences. Dr. Whitmore also noted that the family's psychological state had become completely dependent on this nightly ritual. During daylight hours, they displayed increasing anxiety and agitation as evening approached. More significantly, Dr. Whitmore's medical practice had included a young apprentice named Samuel Hartwell, a Protestant convert to Catholicism whose admiration for his mentor had led him to maintain detailed copies of the doctor's journals and correspondence. When Dr. Whitmore had failed to return from what he had described as an important church meeting, Hartwell had begun investigating his mentor's recent activities and had discovered the horrifying record of the tribunal's work. Young Hartwell faced an impossible choice. Exposing the truth about Bishop Hughes's activities would certainly destroy the Catholic Church's reputation in New York and might trigger violent retaliation against innocent Catholic families by Protestant mobs seeking revenge for the concealed murders. But remaining silent about mass murder committed under religious authority would make him complicit in crimes that violated every principle of justice and human decency. The decision that would ultimately expose the truth came from an unexpected source. Margaret O'Brien, the younger sister of Father Patrick O'Sullivan, had received the last of the forged letters allegedly sent from the Dakota Territory and had noticed discrepancies that convinced her something was wrong. Her brother's handwriting seemed different, his usual expressions were absent, and most tellingly, he had written about ministering to Lakota tribes, using theological concepts he had never demonstrated any knowledge of during his years in New York. Margaret had shared her concerns with other family members of disappeared priests, and together they had begun investigating. What they increasingly suspected was a pattern of deception designed to conceal something terrible. Their inquiries had eventually brought them into contact with Samuel Hartwell, and the combination of Dr. Whitmore's journals and the family's growing evidence of systematic deception had created an alliance dedicated to uncovering the truth about Bishop Hughes's secret activities. The investigation that would ultimately expose the cathedral cemetery had begun in the winter months of 1850, as Margaret O'Brien, Samuel Hartwell, and the relatives of missing priests slowly pieced together evidence that pointed toward mass murder concealed beneath the most sacred ground in Catholic New York. The winter of 1850 brought Margaret O'Brien closer to a truth that would shake the foundations of Catholic power in America. Working by candlelight in her modest apartment on Mott Street, surrounded by her brother's letters and Samuel Hartwell's copied medical journals, she had begun to see patterns that revealed the scope of Bishop Hughes's conspiracy. But uncovering evidence was only the beginning of her challenge. Exposing a man who commanded the loyalty of hundreds of thousands of Catholic immigrants while maintaining the respect of Protestant civic leaders would require courage that few possessed and allies willing to risk everything for justice. Margaret's investigation had revealed that the disappearances followed a precise methodology. Each priest had first been isolated from his supporters through carefully orchestrated character assassination campaigns. Anonymous letters would circulate suggesting financial improprieties or theological errors. Parishioners would report strange behaviors or suspicious meetings. Fellow clergy would express concerns about the priest's mental state or spiritual condition. By the time formal accusations were made, the targeted priest's reputation had been so thoroughly undermined that his sudden departure seemed like a relief rather than a loss. Samuel Hartwell's medical training had helped him recognize the systematic nature of Dr. Whitmore's documentation. The journal entries described experimental protocols for psychological manipulation, detailed observations about human responses to isolation and stress, and clinical assessments of how much physical pressure different personality types could endure before psychological collapse. What had initially appeared to be random cruelty was actually methodical research designed to perfect techniques for breaking human resistance to authority. Most disturbing were Dr. Whitmore's theoretical writings about the application of medieval Inquisition methods to modern religious conflicts. The doctor had become convinced that American Catholicism's survival depended on absolute internal discipline, that the individualistic tendencies encouraged by Protestant culture were incompatible with proper Catholic submission to hierarchical authority. His experiments on captured priests were intended to develop reliable methods for identifying and eliminating what he called Protestant contamination within Catholic communities. The deeper Margaret and Samuel delved into the evidence, the more they realized they were confronting not just individual crimes, but a systematic program designed to transform American Catholicism into something resembling European Catholicism's most authoritarian periods. Bishop Hughes hadn't simply been eliminating troublesome priests. He had been conducting research into methods for ensuring permanent obedience among Catholic populations who had grown accustomed to American freedoms. But their investigation had also revealed something that gave Margaret hope for justice. Dr. Whitmore's obsessive documentation had included detailed maps of the catacomb chambers, precise inventories of human remains, and careful records of which personal effects had been buried with each victim. If they could somehow gain access to the sealed chambers beneath St. Patrick's Cathedral, they would find evidence so overwhelming that even Bishop Hughes's powerful allies couldn't suppress or explain it away. The challenge was finding a way to reach those chambers without alerting Hughes to their investigation. The cathedral construction site was heavily guarded, and any unauthorized excavation would immediately draw attention from church authorities. Margaret needed to find someone with legitimate access to the construction area, someone whose presence wouldn't arouse suspicion, and someone willing to risk their career and possibly their life to help expose the truth. The answer came from an unexpected source. Timothy McNeil, a master stonemason who had been working on St. Patrick's Cathedral since construction began, had approached Margaret after hearing rumors about her investigation through the tight-knit network of Irish immigrant families. McNeil had his own reasons for questioning Bishop Hughes's methods, having witnessed strange activities at the construction site that had troubled his conscience for months. McNeil explained that certain areas of the cathedral's foundation had been declared off-limits to regular construction workers, with only specially selected crews allowed to work in those sections. Tools and materials would disappear from secure storage areas, and he had occasionally heard sounds from beneath the foundation that seemed inconsistent with normal construction activity. Most troubling, several workers who had asked too many questions about the restricted areas had been dismissed from the project and had subsequently left New York entirely, allegedly to seek work in other cities. The stonemason's detailed knowledge of the cathedral's layout, combined with his access to construction areas during off hours, made him the perfect ally for what Margaret was planning. But McNeil's participation would require him to violate his professional obligations to the church that employed him and potentially expose himself to the same fate that had befallen the missing priests. Margaret had learned from her brother's example that challenging Bishop Hughes directly was futile. Instead, she would need to gather irrefutable evidence and present it to authorities who were independent of church influence. The challenge was determining which civil officials could be trusted with information that would inevitably create a massive scandal affecting thousands of innocent Catholic families. Samuel Hartwell suggested approaching the New York City coroner, Dr. Abraham Phelps, a Protestant physician whose professional integrity was widely respected and whose legal authority to investigate suspicious deaths would provide official legitimacy for any discoveries they made. But involving civil authorities would require them to produce evidence compelling enough to justify investigating sacred ground, evidence that could only be obtained by illegally entering the sealed catacomb chambers. The decision to proceed required each conspirator to confront the possibility that their actions might trigger violent retaliation against Catholic communities throughout the city. Protestant nativists had been seeking excuses to attack Catholic institutions, and revelations about mass murder committed by church leadership might provide the justification for mob violence that could destroy everything Catholic immigrants had built in America. Margaret understood this risk better than anyone. Her family had fled Ireland to escape religious persecution, and she had watched her brother dedicate his life to serving Irish immigrants who had nowhere else to turn for spiritual guidance and community support. Exposing Bishop Hughes might save future victims, but it would also potentially destroy the church that provided essential services to the most vulnerable members of New York's population. Yet the alternative was allowing Hughes to continue his reign of terror, knowing that other priests who questioned his authority would face the same fate as her brother. The pattern suggested that the family was indeed receiving some form of genuine biological benefit from their participation in the death of other creatures, though the mechanism by which this occurred remained completely mysterious. Dr. Whitmore's documentation of these physiological changes provided the first concrete evidence that the Harwick family's condition was not purely psychological, but involved genuine alterations in their biological functioning. This discovery would prove crucial in his efforts to find a solution to their devastating affliction, but it also raised disturbing questions about the nature of life, death, and the boundaries between different forms of existence. The winter of 1831 was drawing to a close, but for the Harwick family, each passing day brought them closer to a crisis that could destroy not only their own lives, but potentially threaten the safety of the entire Millbrook community. Dr. Whitmore knew that time was running out, and that he needed to find answers before the family's desperate condition drove them to actions that could never be forgiven or forgotten. The truth about what was happening to the Harwick family would soon be revealed, but that revelation would challenge everything Dr. Whitmore thought he knew about the fundamental nature of human existence and the mysterious forces that govern life and death in the American wilderness. Share this incredible story with someone who appreciates mysteries that push the boundaries of human understanding. Subscribe and hit the notification bell to discover the shocking conclusion to the Harwick family's terrifying ordeal. Drop a comment below with your theory about what could be causing this unprecedented medical phenomenon, because the truth is more extraordinary than anything you might imagine. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.